Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time round, we are checking out a mod by the name of Wrecker. This is a total conversion mod, which puts you in the shoes of a warrior returning from war, only to find his beloved hometown thoroughly curb-stomped by a legion of hellish creatures. Naturally, the only thing to do in this particular circumstance is to return the favor and get busy hacking through the aforementioned abominations until you discover the cause of all this misery. In terms of how much hacking you'll be needing to do here, you should know that Wrecker is a 3-episode ordeal spanning a total of 27 maps. Not to mention a bonus episode too, but that one isn't strictly compulsory for the main campaign. And to kick things off, you'll find yourself here, fending off creatures with the aid of a bow that shoots soul-enhanced arrows. Not bad for something that you begin with as standard. Intriguingly, considering the soul enhancement, you can actually harvest souls from the bodies of fallen enemies should you find yourself running short. You'll have to be quick to the punch, however, because souls, being the ephemeral things that they are, tend not to stick around for too long. That said, not all of the enemies you'll encounter here in this opening level will be so kind as to drop a soul for you upon the death. You've got enemies such as the Grey Husk here, which, as the name implies, is empty. No soul. No soul for you. We've also got rabbits, which don't have a soul. Apologies to any bunny enthusiasts out there, but they do make for a tasty snack if you're running low on health. And you will have also spotted that very disconcerting floating head earlier on in the level, which I've been told is an imp, according to the flavor text of the game, but there's just something about that split jaw design where the fireball is held that kind of gets under my skin, so I'm guessing that's a resounding success on the creepy design front. Speaking of design, it's hard not to notice that overall Wrecker has a very distinctive look about it, from the environments to the enemies to the weapons you wield themselves, all coming together in a style that I'm tempted to describe as Norse punk. I'm particularly a fan of the scattershot here, a wind-up cannon that at first I thought was going to be similar to the chain gun, but actually behaves rather similarly to the good old-fashioned super shotgun. It's just got a nice little satisfying animation to it, and it's definitely got the kick, so I can't complain there. But this overall design philosophy that's running through it is just so consistently applied. It's tremendously well polished. And one thing that goes even further beyond just looking pretty is the fact that each of these levels themselves feel like they contribute something to the overall world building of Wrecker. They don't feel like just levels for the sake of levels. Part of Wrecker that I feel exemplifies this the best is probably during the course of Episode 2. Unlike Episode 1, this takes place in a much more concentrated environment. This is within the capital city of the kingdom itself, each map relating either to a district or a function of how the city operates. And as you go from one level to the next, you notice that the entrance and exits of these are actually linked together, giving you a nice sense of immersion, that you're not just randomly teleporting from one map to the next. As for the individual maps themselves, you'll find that going from Episode 1 into Episode 2, that they certainly increase in terms of scale and complexity, occasionally to their own detriment. You'll find that getting lost is very much a frequent occurrence here, and savvy consultation of the automap is something that you'll most certainly need to get acquainted with, especially if you want to remember where you're going and where you've been. In fact, some of these maps actively antagonize you with how you're supposed to progress. One in particular that caused me to just endlessly scratch my head was one that had me running in circles only to find that the way forward was hidden behind a lava fall that required you to take damage in order to proceed, which is something I don't usually consider and did lead to me just wasting quite a lot of time. If I had to pick out a few maps that I quite enjoyed during the course of Wrecker, I'd certainly single out the likes of Mystery here, which is a map from Episode 2, and involves a trip to the museum. Apparently, this Norse punk society has a museum. And it's got a bunch of really fun little exhibits for you to explore, and crucially, the structure of this level means that you can start this in any order you like. So there's a red section, a blue section, and a yellow section, and at a button press fairly early on, you can choose which one you'd like to attack first. So it lends itself some inherent replayability, but I really did enjoy the dinosaur section here, because as you make your way through it, you get a few pop-up cardboard dinosaurs just lamely menacing you, and it gave me a good chuckle, and it was just overall a tremendously enjoyable level. Another map I quite enjoyed took place during the course of episode 3 and goes by the name of Claustrophilia, and you can probably guess why. It's got a lot of tight spaces for you to squeeze yourself through, and a lot of very interesting and borderline hypnotic looking crusher traps, to such a degree that this particular one here had me a little dazed by the time I got to the other side of it, and I forgot to watch out for the rest of the crusher traps on the other side, resulting in a near pancake experience. But yes, if you suffer from claustrophobia, this will be your very own personal hell. But I do love a map that takes a theme and just runs with it. In terms of maps that I really didn't enjoy, one in particular springs to mind. That would be Aerophobinox, which takes place pretty far down the list of episode 3, and it is nightmarish if you have a slightly poor sense of direction. And at the best of times, I'm alright. I can find my way, but this had me consulting the auto map like crazy, just trying to figure out my orientation and just decide on where the heck I need to go next. You will backtrack, you will loop back on yourself, you will end up in situations where enemies will just flay you alive, especially a room just full of these little totems that endlessly spew fireballs at you. And it also has one of the worst examples of platforming in Wrecker that I've seen, and that's a section where you need to get from platform to platform in a pretty large room, descending as you go, but without the aid of mouse look. Now you can probably imagine why this is a pain in the ass, and you can see why it's a pain in the ass, because it's really friggin' hard to judge distance. It's also really hard to judge how far you need to move, resulting in my loss of will to live, and this just dominated my perception of this level. It just made me see red, and everything around that just fell into the shitter as a result. So if you're going to be playing Wrecker, watch out for this one if you're easily annoyed and have a poor sense of direction, because, yeah, that blood pressure is going to go up. But anyway, let's see if I make it this time. We go across 1, and 2, and we're down on 3. You know what this means? Time to kill myself. I suddenly realized that when it comes to the weaponry of Wrecker, I've only managed to touch on the bow and arrow and scattershot so far, so with that in mind, let me introduce you to the rest of the Wrecker armory, starting with the Staff of Rune Explosion here, a very curious spin on the rocket launcher. Rather than a straight line trajectory, it instead lays runes like mines at the feet of your enemy before exploding after a couple of seconds. The effect, I've got to admit, is a little deflating. I mean, it gets the job done perfectly fine, provided enemies are close enough, but it's just lacking that crucial bit of oomph that makes a weapon feel fun to fire. Same thing goes for the magical plank of wood here, also known as the Holy Relic. It just doesn't feel like I'm firing anything, which is why it feels like such a big difference between that and a weapon like this. Rounding out the rest of the weapons here, we've got the likes of the Soul Launcher, which next to the Scattershot is another distinctive looking weapon. It's got those jawbones festooning the sides of the barrel, and quite frankly, I have no idea if they in fact aid in the endeavor of launching souls into enemy faces, but that doesn't detract from the fact that this weapon is pretty much the workhorse of Wrecker for me. When I've ran out of Scattershot, this is usually next up, and considering it's also powered by souls, much like the bow and arrow, you will find that ammunition is always fairly plentiful. The only other weapon I'm leaving out here would be the Blessing of the Gods, but really that feels like it functions more like a power-up than it does an actual weapon. It essentially fills the same function as the BFG, get enough enemies in your line of sight and pop it off, and A lot of things are going to die, or at the very least receive a lot of damage. Visually, it doesn't have a lot of pyrotechnics going on, and if I did want to show you it, I'd run the risk of spoiling the final boss battle here, which really, if possible, I'd like you guys to be able to experience for yourself. All in all, Wrecker is a tricky mod for me to sum up. On one hand, it's easy to see that there's been a tremendous amount of effort poured into this. You can see it in the use of textures, you can see it in the sprite work, be it weapons, enemies, or even just environmental objects, and you can even hear it in the music, which fits the theming very appropriately, even if it does occasionally devolve into a bit of a mind-numbing bagpipe drone during the course of certain levels. On the other hand, there's some aspects of Wrecker that feel like they're holding it back. The sensation of firing some weapons, as I mentioned earlier, can feel oddly deflating, and some levels, while impressively designed, can veer into the territory of almost too clever for their own good, causing my opinion of them to zigzag between, oh hey, that's pretty neat, and oh god, please kill me, I've been stuck here forever. Would I recommend Wrecker? Absolutely. Even with my hangups, it's more than worthy of your attention. It's practically an entire new game in its own right, just that it so happens to be running on Doom. Another thing I'd recommend is not binging your way through Wrecker, at least not in the way I did, which largely took the form of episode-long chunks. Rather, Wrecker feels like it would have been a much more enjoyable experience if I'd been able to tackle it in shorter, bite-sized sessions. At the very least, I hope that's the case for those of you out there that choose to play it. And on that note, if you're interested, you can find the link for Wrecker, as usual, in the description below. While I'm at it, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so very much for supporting the channel, and thank you for helping to make content like this possible. If you're interested in lending a hand yourself, maybe you'd like to see your name in the credits, or maybe you'd like to get your hands on early editions of Doom Mod Madness before everyone else, well, in that case, you'll find the link to my Patreon page also in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future episodes of Doom Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.